All right, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Schreier. I am a junior here at the University of Dayton, double majoring in music and history. I'm an intern with the Human Rights Center, where I've worked on projects like the Vietnam Legacies Project, and I am currently researching how museums conduct advocacy on social justice and human rights issues. Tonight's session is going to be recorded and added to the UDigital and Alumni Association's YouTube playlists. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We have tried to work them into our session, and we'll have time for additional Q&A at the end of the session. Tonight, we have the honor to meet an accomplished flyer that has received many accolades throughout her career. Essence Magazine referred to her as the Keeper of King's Legacy. She was named the 2020 Memphian of the Year, as well as the 2020 University of Dayton Alumni Award recipient of the Special Achievement Award. Welcome, Terry Lee Freeman.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Katie.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you here. Freeman graduated from UD in 1981 and majored in communication. She also has a master's in organizational communications management from Howard University. Throughout her professional career, Freeman has held leadership roles of the Freddie Mac Foundation, the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region, and the National Civil Rights Museum. She's also served on the board of directors for a number of took over as the executive director of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. So, Terry, from one flyer to another, why did you decide to attend UD for your undergrad?
Well, at the time, I spent my senior year in high school in Detroit, even though I was born and raised in Chicago. And we looked at a variety of schools. I had gotten information about UD at a college fair, actually. And, I didn't really have any preferred schools. So I just started choosing brochures as I found them, and Dayton looked interesting, and we came down for a visit, and I fell in love with the campus. And that was all she wrote. So I didn't want to go to a huge school. I didn't want to go to a tiny school. So UD was kind of right in the sweet spot of what I wanted to do. And it wasn't too far from home, about a 3-hour drive. So it just fit all the boxes.
Nice. I can definitely relate to coming to campus and just falling in love with it.
Mm-hmm.
Any favorite flyer memory you'd like to share with us?
Well, I was very active when I came to UD. I actually started a Black dance troupe on campus called Shades of Black, and I also was a flyerette when I was at UD, and I pledged a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So I stayed pretty busy while I was on campus. And my senior year, I did have a little job. I don't even remember the name of the mall, but working at Sears in the mall, which I'm sure doesn't exist any longer since Sears has gone out of business. But I just really enjoyed UD and the entire campus experience.
Nice. How has your UD experience impacted your professional career?
Well, I am one of those people who believes that undergrad basically teaches you and tells other people that you're trainable, that you can actually stick with something and do it, right? So I think that I learned some basic principles that allowed me to be able to, begin a project, find the middle to the project, and end the project. And I also think it helped me develop leadership skills because I was the president of our AKA chapter for a couple years while I was on campus. So it helped me develop leadership skills, and that all came into play in grad school and then after grad school and in the world of work.
Nice. It's always great to see how UD lays the framework for growing and developing over time in your professional career. So as mentioned, you've held many leadership positions, so we have a few questions around your career. What are factors that you look for when considering a career opportunity?
Well, for me, it was really about what I wanted to do. So initially, I was a journalism major when I was at UD. and communication arts. And after graduating, kind of realized that I wasn't certain that I wanted to do newspaper writing. I hadn't taken the broadcast route. I was really focused on print media. Little did I know that, 40 years from then, print media would be almost out of business, frankly. But I love to write. So I thought, well, what about going to grad school and going on to get a degree in business communication? So ultimately, for me, it was about what I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed public speaking, and it was a nice way to kind of mix what I had done in undergrad with what I was doing in grad school. And I actually got a job right in corporate communications. But after that, I would say that I kind of fell into the career path that the career that led me on the path that I'm on now, because I started in corporate communications, but when Freddie Mac became a quasi-public entity, we decided to have a community relations program, and they asked me if I would manage that program. And it's kind of the rest was history. Once I started doing that community relations work, I realized that it allowed me to really learn more about what was going on in the community. And at that time, our emphasis on the work that we were doing in community relations was with children. And I had a young family myself. So it really allowed me to kind of combine my personal interest with my professional work. And I do believe that people should spend time working, doing what they like, because we spend so much time doing it. So for me, I've always been driven a little bit by the passion that I've had for community and being able to figure out how I can work within that realm.
That's great. Yeah. Are there any non-negotiables that you have when choosing a career or a job?
Well, I have to be able to have a little bit of fun. I mean, if it's boring, no, thank you. I mean, I think every person, and particularly when you're first starting, you always have to do some things that you don't love. I mean, I still don't love doing reporting, but I have to do it, right? But ultimately, I think I have to be able to have some fun. And I have to, at this point in my life, know that I'm making some contribution that is going to benefit the community or others in some way.
Yeah, that's great. Um, so from 2014 until January 2021, you were the president of the National Civil Rights Museum, and you
Mhm.
recently took over as the executive director of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. So how did you make the transition from working for major foundations like the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region to leadership roles at museums?
Sure. So first, I think I have to say, I certainly have chosen places to work at that have really long names. So you can you can call the museum that I'm at now the Lewis. That's what we call it usually. So how did I make that change? Well, Freddie Mac, I was there for 13 years with the last, let's say, last 6 years focused on that community relations and the corporate foundation. So that's how I got into philanthropy. I left Freddie Mac and went to the Community Foundation where I was for 18 years. And that is a long time by anybody's measure, particularly today when people don't stay in jobs for that long, typically any longer. And so I knew that it was about time for me to figure out what my next step and what my next path was. I also knew that when you are at the top of an organization in a field like philanthropy, the moving is difficult because one, usually well, not usually, there are fewer positions at that level, right? More positions in philanthropy in general, but fewer at the top of the organization. So you have to wait for someone to leave, or you have to go outside of the area that you have built your career. So for me, the opportunity to work at the National Civil Rights Museum, when it presented itself, it felt as though it would give me the opportunity to take everything that I had learned while I was making grants and raising money at the same time, but really to be able to actualize doing the work on the ground in a way. While I wasn't working at a direct service organization, while I wasn't working at an advocacy organization, I was working in an institution that provided a platform for me to talk about issues that were important to the community, but also for me to allow other people to use that platform to continue to push forward issues of, justice and freedom, and just ensuring that people have the rights that they should have based on their citizenship and based on their being human beings. And so um, I really felt at that point in my career that it was important for me to be able to have a point of view on some of these issues and use the institution that actually was in existence because of a terrible tragedy against an individual, but against humanity, and all that was peaceful and right and just, to be able to push forward an agenda for peace, righteousness, and justice. So that was really exciting to me. And I learned a lot of new things while I was in that realm because I didn't have a museum studies background. I've always enjoyed museums, but it really was more about that kind of social and racial justice platform that I would have at that museum. And then in transitioning to the Lewis, I still have that opportunity, but the museum's issue areas are a little bit broader than simply civil, and I shouldn't say simply, but broader than civil.
Yeah, that's amazing. What are some of your favorite moments from being the director of these museums?
Wow, I've met some incredible people. If I do say so myself, I met, gosh, you name them: Andy Young, John Lewis, Ava DuVernay, Susan Taylor, James, Reverend Lowry, C.T. Vivian, Bernice King, all these incredible people, Joe Biden, Jill Biden, and the list just goes on and on of incredible people who have done incredible things in their lifetime, and to sit and have the opportunity to talk with these people and learn from them. I you know I actually even developed a friendship with Jesse Jackson. And, these are so interesting because many of these people, they really love to talk about their story. They love to tell you about the path that they took and what it was like to do the work that they did when they did it. And then to be able to meet some contemporary people like Ibram X. Kendi, and some other, April Ryan and Tamron Hall, and just people who we see on a regular basis through the media that we use, but to be able to talk with them and get to know them a little bit. I think of particular note for me. One of the people that I met that I was the most impressed with actually was Farrakhan. And his manner is very different than what people perceive. But what's interesting about that meeting was the first time I met him, I was at the University of Dayton because he came to UD as a speaker. So it was kind of a full circle experience in a way. But I would have to say, being able to meet those individuals and just listen to their stories, an incredible experience.
Yeah, that's a really incredible list of people you've gotten to meet. And speaking of incredible people, you've been referred to as the keeper of King's legacy, and that's a pretty heavy title to carry. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by such an important title?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the weight of that place. If you've never been to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, I would encourage you to go. I do think it's a trip that everyone should make, and I can guarantee you that you will be changed in some way after you go visit that museum. But walking past that balcony every day, um, it, the weight of what happened there. And you think about the reason why King was in Memphis, what he was fighting for. And that was motivation enough to say, okay, you got to keep on fighting for, racial and social justice. You got to keep fighting for economic equity. You've got to keep fighting for educational equity. You got to make sure that voting rights are not stolen from people, because the people on the walls of that museum fought so hard and experienced such terror, just trying to secure the rights that they deserved. I did in many ways feel that I had a responsibility to ensure that what we were doing at that place and in that space would have been in line with what they had accomplished over their lifetimes.
Yeah. Are there any practices or ideals from MLK that can guide today's citizens as I continue to fight for human rights?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that people think of King and they think of peaceful protest, and that certainly was what he was known for. But what I think people need to understand is that he was still an activist. He was still a radical. He believed in the things that he believed in. And many people, there are lots of conspiracies around Dr. King's assassination. It really started to get hot, if you will, when he started talking about capitalism, militarism, and racism as the three evils of our country, in particular, the whole issue around the Vietnam War. And when he came out against Johnson, on that point, many people felt that he was betraying the movement because Johnson was a friend of the movement. And I think that his position is important and can be helpful as people decide to do organizing and work in community, is that he stood on his beliefs and he was not intimidated by those people who said, you can't stand on your beliefs, you have to do what's going to be, what was in one speech, he talked about doing what was politic, right? Do what you should do, stay in your lane. And that's what he heard a lot. But he had to stand on what he felt was the moral imperative. And the moral imperative was to do what was right for all people. And I think that if we all stood on our moral imperative, I think we would see our country, our nation move in a little bit of a different direction, and not be persuaded by what we think is politic, not worry about what people say about you on social media, but just stand on those things that you believe are right. And remember that you have personal integrity that you always have to ensure is intact.
Yeah, that's great advice. Do you have a particular proud moment from your time at the National Civil Rights Museum? We already touched on this a bit, but if there's anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I think likely I say this every time someone asks me this. I should always say that my most proud moment was the 50th commemoration of Dr. King's assassination, because it was a huge to do. It was a year-long commemoration that culminated those few days of April 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, with the 4th being the date of his assassination. And that's when we had all of those icons came back to the Lorraine Motel. And we had the people who I called your new movement makers, those people who are out there today as we're looking at the movement for Black Lives and, Me Too and all of these other movements that were taking place. So we had all of these people there culminating in just looking backwards, but looking backwards to look forward, to be able to progress forward. So I feel like I should always say that that was my most proud moment, to actually have gotten through that commemoration. But for me, the proudest moment was the creation of a 7-month-long dialogue series called I'm trying to think of the name of the session now, Unpacking Racism for Action. And it was 7 months of a cohort-based program where people applied for the program, and it went deep into implicit bias and structural racism. That for me was my proudest moment, because over the course of the 4 years that we did that program, we had more and more people who wanted to apply. We actually got people saying that the sessions had truly changed how they looked at the issues of bias, racism, and even how they dealt with people differently after that. So those are the things that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, this is some great projects, and it's really cool to see museums as a site where this can happen.
Mhm.
So younger generations, including myself, tend to focus on issues that affect them in the moment. How can museums strive to be more relevant?
Well, you were breaking up just a little bit for me, Katie. I'm hoping that you can hear me still. I look at museums as being places that serve as meeting places and public gathering places, where I don't want to say we're neutral. I don't believe that museums are neutral. I believe that once you step out on a topic, you actually are making a statement by saying that that topic is worthy of your time. But I do feel like it can be a bit of a non-judgment zone, and that you can open up conversation and dialogue in these places in a way that it is more comfortable for the variety of people that would consider your place a space that is, if you will, a safe space. And I do think you talked about issues of the moment. Usually, though, issues of the moment are a part of a bigger issue, right? So it's never just the issue of the moment. It's how you look at that particular issue. And so I think that museums have a really important role to play, particularly museums that talk about history and culture of disenfranchised populations. So, museums that focus on those people who one might call minorities in this country, that history and the experience of those people in America becomes really important to highlight and to present so that everybody can understand their experience. So I don't think that museums do serve the purpose of just furthering an appreciation of art, an appreciation of culture, an appreciation of history. But they also should serve a purpose of inspiring and encouraging people to act in some way based on the knowledge that they gain through their visit to the museum.
Yeah, I totally agree. Before I ask the next question, I just want to remind the audience that they can submit questions through the Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to them at the end. So talking more about museums, they're truth tellers of our history. So should we support them even if the history is a negative?
Well, yeah, I mean, no, what history is all positive, And I think that's what, I mean, you have to take the good with the bad. Let me give you an example. As we talked about Confederate statues, and what should be done with Confederate statues, I was not a proponent of having statues of people who were committing treason. I mean, they were. But once the statue exists, I thought it should be put in a place where the story could be interpreted correctly, so that we're not just talking about these people for what we thought was their heroism, but that we are talking about the full story of, in Memphis, Nathan Bedford Forrest. You have to tell the whole story of Nathan Bedford Forrest. You can't just talk about him as a war hero. You do have to talk about him as one of the founders of the KKK. You do have to talk about him as a slave trader. And it is important for people to understand the whole story. And for so long, we have been getting pieces of the story, you especially as it relates to the African American experience in this country. And so I think that you do have to tell the ugly truth, the good truth, the bad truth, but you have to tell the truth.
Right. Yeah, that's something I've learned as a history major here. There's no totally positive parts of history. So the next question is, museums in social justice conversation while staying or political?
Okay, so I lost you a little bit, but I think, make sure I'm answering the question that you were asking, how do we talk about some of these issues without being political?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yes. Am I
Well,
frozen?
Well, I think that we do have to, I don't think that we should really be focused on politics with a big P, but I do think we have to talk about policy. And I think we have to recognize that some of the reason we're in the places that we're in now is because of policy decisions that were made by whatever political party that have had a negative impact on certain communities. And so while I would never be a proponent inside of the museums that I'm managing of talking about political parties, other than saying, let's talk about the two-party system and maybe begin to think outside of the box, I'm not going to be one who says pro or con for either of the particular parties. And I'm not going to say pro or con with regard to political candidates, but I will talk about good policy and bad policy and go deep into good policy and bad policy and why things don't work for community and why some things do work for community. That's the role that I think we should play. Now, I'm not going to say that if I'm having a public program and somebody wants to talk about a political candidate, I'm not going to shut them down from doing that. But my approach would not be then to come back and talk more about the political candidate, but really focus on the policies that, created inequitable healthcare systems in our country. That's the way I think it's most effective, because once you start getting into personalities, people just kind of shut down.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to have. Final question about museums, just kind of overall what we've been talking about. How can museums be more inclusive?
Well, that's a really good question, because let's face it, some of our cultural institutions really have operated out of a very paternalistic, a very capitalist type of system. So that while they were public spaces, they weren't always welcoming to everybody, right? And I think that museums have begun to turn that corner. I think that we have to look at sources of funding for museums. If your sources of funding only come from large funders and you have no individual base, then you don't necessarily feel like you have anything that you have to do for the individuals, right? You're focused on those larger entities. So I think it's a balance for organizations. So diversifying the funding is one way that you can increase diversity in the museum. The other is, frankly, just hire some people that look different than you. I mean, really, there are, well, after the whole George Floyd situation and talking with corporations and, we can't find anybody, I don't accept that. I don't even want to hear that excuse. Because you can find people if you want to find people. You can groom people if you want to groom people. You can mentor people if you want to mentor people. Or how about this? Where's your banking relationship? You can have a banking relationship at an institution that is not an all-white led institution. What about your, in the philanthropic arena, who's doing your investment management for all those big assets? Did you ever think that you might want to look at a minority or woman-led firm to manage your assets? That's the way we spread wealth. It's not just about what the rank and file look like. It's about where the money is going. So I think if you want true diversity, you have to look at diversifying every level and layer of the organization. And yes, that includes the board, the governing boards of these institutions as well, because they're the ones that make a lot of those incredibly important and powerful financial decisions. And that, to me, is where you begin to level the playing field. When we start talking about the money and who's getting a piece and a slice of the pie, that's when we start to actually create equity.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to go into our Q&A portion, and the participants can still submit questions at any time through the Q&A box. Our first question is, how does an organization create buy-in from the community, a product that generates funding in order to continue preserving, collecting, and showcase local history?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways you can do it. First of all, you can have, and we're just beginning to do this a little bit, you can have the community curate exhibits. You can have them actually, you can take a topic and you can have them actually curate the exhibit. So back in 2017, I think it was, I don't recall, when Philando Castile was murdered, the Dallas shooting occurred where police officers were killed, and there was one more gentleman who was killed in Little Rock, I want to say, somewhere around there. We actually created an exhibit that was a chain link fence, and I did a blog called Stolen Lives, and we asked people to write on index cards their experience with gun violence, violence of any type. And so what we did was we created a chain link fence that ended up having the voices of the community on it, as well as artifacts that the community left behind on the chain link fence. So community curation is one way of doing it. I think that you can do events that bring people into the museum and ask people to support the organization with small contributions. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it should be community activities. So if you do book fairs, or if you do health fairs, or if you do, some organizations even do a call for artifacts, and they help the individuals who bring the artifacts better understand what their artifacts are, to know what you have in the attic, or what Aunt Jane handed down, and what value that had, is another way of getting people to feel like they're a part of these big institutions that have these huge collections, where in fact we only have collections because of the individuals in the community. So I think those are some of the ways that you can actually get community buy-in.
Yeah, those are some really cool projects. I'd love to see the chain link fence. That sounds incredible. Our next question is, Can you please explain the significance of African American history in mainstream museums such as county public museums and other prestigious museums?
Well, I guess the short answer to that is the significance is that we've always been there, no matter where we are in the country. We've always been there. So to make sure that we are telling the full story, we have to tell the stories of Black and Brown people, right? And I think if people would get over the fact that the history is not pretty, and just tell the truth and inform people about what has happened in smaller jurisdictions or state-based museums. You know, the Lewis is a state museum that talks about African American history and culture within the state of Maryland. And Maryland has had a very interesting history in the nation's history, but also with African Americans. I mean, you think of some of the people that have come out of Maryland, huge figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, huge figures like Billie Holiday and U.B. Blake. And so there are, there's a lot, and many, many others, obviously, but there's a lot of story to be told. And the state's history or the county's history is richer by telling the entire story. And I think museums are coming to terms with the fact that what they do is tell stories. They are storytellers. And when you think of these institutions as places where we preserve and tell stories, it becomes easier to understand. You know, it's like sitting down at the foot of your grandparents, listening to their experiences. Well, that's what you get in these institutions, but you shouldn't get a sugar-coated version of it. You should get the real truth about the situation. So people leave with a newfound interest in what makes the place that they call home, home.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, the next question is, how do you keep yourself educated? Any pieces of literature you would recommend to other individuals?
Wow, okay. So yeah, I read a fair amount. I my personal preference is to read fiction, but that's not going to inform me about anything. So what I try to do is I'll read fiction and then I'll read nonfiction. But I have read some, well, here's working at the National Civil Rights Museum. To read King's writings is to better understand him, because otherwise you're going to think King basically did two speeches. The speech at the March on Washington, I Have a Dream, and the mountaintop speech. You may have a little bit of knowledge about the letter from Birmingham jail. You may have a little knowledge about I'm trying to think there's one talking about remaining awake during a revolution. But there's so much more to him. And so when you read his books, you really get a better sense of who he was and what the movement was like. But I guess I would encourage anyone who wants to know more about a period in time to identify the individuals that you want to know more about. And then take it from there, either through a Google search or books that are dedicated to that particular topic. And usually it will lead you into other areas. I mean, one of the books that I read that was really interesting was called From the Ballot to the Bullet. And it was about the period of time between the Voting Rights Act and the Panther Party. And it was just a fascinating read because it told me the truth about the Panther Party, not what people tell you about the Black Panthers. So I would first encourage people, because not everybody's reads that way, find a museum that talks about these difficult topics of history. And then you can go deeper by learning more about the individuals that are reflected in those particular museums.
Yeah, this is some great
Oh, and
recommendations.
let
I'll
me
have
just
to.
add this too, Katie. And I do love documentaries. I absolutely love documentaries because they bring it to life. You can read a story and you can use your imagination, but when you are actually able to see it, it's almost like you're participating in it. One of my favorite documentaries about Dr. King is one called King in the Wilderness, and it's about the last year of King's life. If it gives you, it just makes so plain how difficult his journey was that final year, and it really puts a spotlight not just on the fact that King was, disliked by many people in the white community, but King was disliked by many people in the Black community. And it's a really interesting story, King in the Wilderness.
Wow, that sounds. Um, right now we have not a question, but a Soror Terry, you're doing an awesome job on the webcast. Congratulations, such a wealth of information.
Well, thank you.
The next question is, does the Reginald Blue Museum hire college interns? What do you look for in an intern? And are there virtual opportunities as well as in-person opportunities?
So I have been there all of 7 weeks now, so I'm still very new at the Lewis, but yes, we do have interns. Now, right now, we only have 2 interns, and understand, the museum was closed for a while. We had to lay off staff. And when you're in a situation where you have to lay off staff, it's really hard to bring in interns, right? Because you want to be loyal to the people who have been working for the institution. But once able to get people back into the museum, yes, interns are a really important part of, I think, museum culture. For in every element of the work. And what I tell people is, if you're interested in marketing, you can still look at a museum internship because we have to do marketing. If you're interested in finance, you can still work at a museum as an intern because we have a finance department. If you're interested in history, of course, we've got the curators. So yes, it's an important part. It's added talent. And we like to make sure that we're giving interns really important work to do that is going to really help them in their career. And I encourage all students to do internships, but make sure that and I also believe in paid internships, right? We should not be asking people to do free labor. So they may not be, a lot of money, but you ought to be getting something, some type of payment for the work that you are providing, because that's going to stay there with that institution.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much a proponent of paid internships as a student. Next question is, please speak to the significance of the newly named Jessie S. Hathcock Hall, and that she was a Black woman and a member of AKA.
Well, you know what? I'm not familiar with it. So I can't speak to it at all. And I'm sorry, I would love to know more about it.
Yeah, I don't know too much about it, but I think the new computer science hall was named after her, and she was one of the first Black women to graduate from UD with a degree in that.
That is fabulous. I did not know that. That's real. So now I have to get back to UD just so I can see the building.
Absolutely, yeah. I haven't gotten to see it in person yet, but I saw the construction and it looked pretty good then. So, okay, yeah, first African American graduate. I got that part right.
That's great.
Yeah. The next question is, how can museums come back stronger from the disruptive experience of the pandemic?
Whew. Well, I actually think we're going to do okay. So the first issue, obviously, is that most of us had to just shut our doors, right? So the first step is getting the doors open. The second step is getting some level of capacity back so that you can have people in your building. And some museums are more suited for people to be back in the museums, in the spaces earlier than others. I think a lot of museums went from a walk up and just get a ticket to a time ticketing situation so that they could ensure that people were spaced out, so that it was safe for people. I do think that most museums have effectively used virtual programming and kept people at least attuned of the type of work or the type of activity, history, culture, art that they display. And I think that that taught many of us that, wow, we can reach a lot more people through this virtual platform. That said, we live and die by people coming into the museum. So ultimately, what will be important is that we are able to get back to at least something close to the capacity that we had before. And actually, I'm going to take that back because at the National Civil Rights Museum, it actually used to get uncomfortably crowded. So the fact that we have time ticketing now will eliminate that, and actually is something that will be beneficial in the long run. But I think cultural institutions are going to bounce back when people feel comfortable. One of the things that I think we miss the most are the school buses. And having children in the spaces, because that's a big part of the business for museums, is having those school groups come in from early childhood all the way up through, frankly, spring break with colleges visiting our institutions. But I think it's going to come back, and I think we're going to be prepared for people to come back with programming, with great exhibitions, but also with programming that is both in person and virtual.
Yeah, great. Going off of that question, do you see a greater diversity of visitors to the museum in recent years?
Oh, so I can't speak to the Lewis yet because we have, is really, our attendance is really low right now. But the level of diversity at the National Civil Rights Museum is quite significant. And while I would say, actually, the data went back and forth for us. Sometimes we would see that we had majority of our visitors were African American, and other times we would see that the majority of our visitors were white. And then we had all sorts of visitors in between. And we used to get a lot of international visitors as well. That I don't think is going to come back right away, not the international visitors, but people that can drive to the museum, they're going to get to the museum, and it is a very, very diverse crowd.
Yeah, that's great. Let me see. Next question is, some additional information. Jessie Hathcock was the first African-American female graduate. She was also the founder of Beta Eta Omega, the AKA graduate chapter.
Look at me, I'm supposed to know that, right? It's been a long time. So whoever put that up there, I just celebrated my 42nd anniversary in the sorority. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's incredible. Okay, next question is, what museum is missing from today's environment? And if you have an opportunity to create a museum of your choosing, what would it be?
I'm sure that this museum exists because there's probably a museum on every topic you could probably think of. But I think the fierce urgency of climate, I think it deserves a museum. I think to talk about the evolution, and I'm sure that, museums of science do include this, but something that really talked about the climate challenges that we're facing. In fact, one would think that maybe Al Gore would be involved in some type of an effort to do something like that. But I think that that's really important. And there are women's museums that have popped up all over the country. So I think that looking at women's contributions has certainly become something that we're doing through the museum sphere. I'll tell you what museum I wish would come back is the Newseum. The museum that was about the news. And it was in Washington, D.C. It closed down a couple of years ago. They said they were going to reopen in a different place, in a different format, but it was a fabulous, especially for news junkies and for journalism students. It was a fabulous museum. Probably, don't tell anybody, my favorite museum was probably the Newseum.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the News Museum opening up fresh wounds. So sad it's gone.
Right.
So, yeah. All right. The final question before we get to your closing thoughts is, what is the legacy you would like to leave behind?
You know, one of the things that I say, well, it's actually in my bio. I say that what is important is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And my hope is that what people will say is that I made some contribution to the community, or I made some contribution to the people that I was able to hire and that I was able to allow people to develop into their leadership skills. Because ultimately, that's going to be what's important, what I leave behind, not so much what I have done over the course of my career. And it probably sounds pretty trite when you say you really just want to make sure that you've made an impact, but that's it. I just want to know that my kids and my family can be proud of the work that I have done and that I've poured into somebody else to give back in a lot of ways for what was poured into me.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, Terry, thank you so much for your thoughts, your insight, and your willingness to contribute to this discussion and talk with us. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with our attendees?
I guess the only thing that I would say, Katie, and thank you, you've been a fabulous interviewer,
Thank you.
is I hope people understand that we never stop learning. And that while we may only engage in formal education for a season, the informal education continues for a lifetime. And we're never too old to make the decision to change a direction. We should never be afraid to do that. So I just keep an open mind about all those things that you're interested in doing, and try to do just a fraction of them.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Terry, and thank you to all of our attendees who have listened in, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Go Flyers.
Thank you.
Thank you.